Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Oliver Lomer from Sungard Availability Services, and today I'll be your moderator for the webinar entitled Gauge Your Cloud Maturity. Cloud is no longer an option. It's unavoidable if you want to succeed, but cloud strategies differ extensively based on your company's goals and their investments. Today we're fortunate to have Bill Martorelli, Principal Analyst at Forrester, to guide us through Forrester's Cloud Maturity Assessment. By the end of today's webinar, you'll be able to gauge where your firm stands in its cloud journey and learn from Sungard AS how they can help you reach your long-term goals. We want you to get the most value from attending today, so we recommend that you download a copy of the presentation. We believe that this is a best practice for attendees. It's a great opportunity and place to take notes. It's a fantastic reminder of this event. And the presentation is something that ideally you can share with your peers in your organization and beyond. So without further ado, I'll hand things over to Bill. Over to you, Bill.
All right, thank you, Ali, and thank you everyone for joining us today. I do want to point out that Ali very helpfully pointed out we do have a presentation in which we will cover aspects of gauging cloud maturity, but there's also an interactive worksheet that we'd like to make available to you also, so that you can kind of play along after the presentation in engaging your very cloud maturity. And I guess I'd like to just start off by asking why would we care, right? Why would we even bother to think about the importance of cloud maturity? And I guess it gets to the question of why do we find the cloud so compelling in the first place? And I know that we as an industry have been through a variety of iterations of this, that on the one hand, it could be, a less expensive way to achieve computing. It could be a better, way to optimize infrastructure resources, whatever. But the consensus, in at least in our view, has come that above all else, and not to say that the cloud is not these other things as well, but above all else, cloud is a mechanism or a method, a paradigm by which customers can create new ecosystems, right? Creating new business capabilities, connecting customers to applications, data, and devices in a way that puts the customer at the center. And this, I think, sometimes we describe this as agility, is certainly one of the most fundamental and one of the most powerful aspects that we're seeing as we move forward in the cloud. But the question is, how do we get there, right? And what do we need to do in order to think about moving forward in our cloud strategies? And like any other, or there's many unique aspects of the cloud, but like any other major change, we need to ask a series of questions, including, when do we do it, right? When do we do it? How do we do it? Who do we do it with? And I think the answer to some of these questions can be very important in terms of formulating our strategy and overall approach. Here I've listed a couple of issues that we feel, companies should ask themselves as they embark upon their cloud journey, right? And to understand that ultimately no two journeys to the cloud, and you emphasize that word journey, are going to be identical. On the one hand, we've all heard about the very thing that I mentioned about the cloud, its ability to create new business ecosystems, is actually a source of some threat, right, to companies fearing that new startups empowered by the cloud can threaten and undermine entire, existing businesses and supply chains. The emergences of new fintechs, for example, or of course the very well-known examples of the ride-sharing companies and the Airbnb. How real is the threat to your business, right? I mean, certainly this, the threat will vary based on your risk of being disintermediated, let's say, by new cloud startups. Another question is, what is your risk tolerance? Are you more concerned about possible negative impact on your brand of not doing it the right way, or of doing it in such a way that you don't achieve the benefits and incur only perhaps new costs or new technical debt? This again is a question that companies need to answer for themselves. And of course, do you have heavy regulatory and security requirements that you need to be mindful? Obviously, companies in the financial services and healthcare do have this issue, and therefore have been, to some extent, I would say, very mindful, very careful in terms of their movement into the cloud, and have typically done so in a relatively limited and conservative manner. But I'm here to tell you today that really, even though no two cloud journeys are exactly alike, regardless of where you are, you've got plenty of company. Let me assure you of this. And in calibrating your journey, again, measuring your risk profile, measuring the urgency in terms of potential threats to your business, as well as your overall preparedness, you can make the decisions you need to make with regard to cloud strategy, the timeline with which you will be moving to the cloud, which specific cloud technologies you will be using, what applications will you be either creating in the cloud or moving there, and what partners, if any, will you require the assistance of in your journey. Now, I guess you could say, all right, so now we think about the why, but what about the how, right? And I guess, in terms of embarking on the cloud, we need to have some kind of strategy as to how to get there, right? Some kind of plan, if you will. Although, clearly not the type of static, unchanging plan that we may have used in the past, in past iterations of IT, but, rather kind of a living plan, if you will, a dynamic plan that includes goals. What do we hope to achieve? Let's say initial use cases, quick wins, if you will. What will shape the initial focus of our strategy, mindful of what the subsequent steps will be as well. Of course, all of this will be in a holistic plan that scales along with considerations of execution and a roadmap that carries us into the future. Now, we talked about the idea of our very webinar as maturity. In many ways, the questions of readiness and maturity are logically, we find, very intertwined. And in kind of considering, the kind of factors you will need to consider as you formulate your cloud strategy, as you formulate your cloud plan, I got a list of 10 things to consider. We have a document about this that you might want to read as well. Let me know if you'd like access to it. But just to begin, number one, what is the scope and plan of your organization's overall digital transformation, and how does cloud fit into it, right? Enable your transformation goals. We do believe, of course, that cloud is at the center of this transformation and is really a key element of it. But the specifics and then the scope are something to consider somewhat carefully. Also, where are we now, right? What is the current state of our infrastructure resources? How virtualized are we, right? Where are our workloads today? And where do we want them to be in the future? What about the importance of getting new applications built so that we can remain competitive in our industry? So-called systems of engagement, if you will, that we use to describe applications that directly engage with clients and customers and seek to maximize not only the profitability of our relationships with them, but their retention. And if not new applications, what about, let's say, our plans for migration and modernization of our existing application portfolio? Can we transition some of these to SaaS alternatives? And in what sequence will we want to pursue migration versus modernization, which is one of the key decisions we find in companies embarking on an aggressive cloud migration journey. And finally, where are your people and where is your data? Anybody that's watching the cloud industry carefully these days will note that a number of important recent initiatives from major hyperscalers have to do with new facilities to deal with workloads that don't move readily to the cloud and attach, or at least approach the question of data latency in recognition of the fact that data location is very critical in formulating your overall cloud strategy. And moving forward to the second set, what about organizational culture in your industry? Is it conducive to rapid movement in the cloud, or are you more of a conservative bent? These, of course, aspects will inform your strategy, as will existing skill sets of staff, your budget for new talent acquisition and training, and let's face it, whether you are in a position really to compete with the high tech companies that are succeeding in attracting at least the cream of the crop in terms of new cloud expert talent, and be realistic as to your capability to compete with them, or whether you may need to opt for a more partner-centric strategy. And finally, the size and types of your new development requirements. Obviously, companies that are very focused on enterprise packages or heavily outsourced will take a somewhat different tack with regard to cloud strategy. And of course, the financial realities of your organization with regard to your potential for investment and your willingness and ability to at least accommodate some possibly increased costs, at least temporarily, as you migrate toward the cloud. Now, getting to this maturity assessment we talked about, right? We see it as essentially consisting of three primary elements: people, process, and technology. And look, the reason we're doing it is not to give you a gold star or a silver star and say you're mature or not. Sure, that may be important to realize, but more to the point, to identify areas for specific improvement, right? So that you can actually target your efforts in terms of making yourselves more, let's say, ready for effective use of the cloud in light of the assessment you've already performed with regard to your risk profile and your readiness for change. In terms of the people, I think it's important to recognize that a lot of people have thought of the cloud as sort of a bottoms-up phenomena, right? Bubbling up from ground up. But in reality, and I think, again, here's another recognition we've made as an industry, I think, in recent days, and that is really need to think very strongly about the need for executive sponsorship. And there's no substitute clearly for that. In terms of assessing maturity, we also need to think about our capacity for training and career development. Can we do it? How well do we do it? As well as our existing inventory of cloud experience and skills. Also, a current emphasis on customer experience is we believe, an important element, as are relatively, let's say, fluid sourcing models, right? Models that are conducive to, let's say, evolution and change in light of the fact that we believe the fully cloud mature organization is quite different than the more traditional infrastructure and operations organization, with its embrace of new processes like DevOps and, again, more fluid and dynamic staffing models. And finally, the focus on improving the development process. No question that the cloud is, in large part, a software and development environment, and a focus on improving that development process and encompassing new architectural principles like microservices and the like are very important. Now, turning to processes, what are some of the elements of maturity here? Well, one of which is an understanding of cloud applications and platforms that are already in use. Let's say a sense of can we perform discovery and understand what we've got and understand where. A lot of times this can be quite surprising to the large enterprise to understand just how much cloud has sprouted in various lines of business or user organizations without either the knowledge or the explicit blessing of central IT. One of the other things we've encountered, particularly over the last several years, has been the difficulty of matching the speed and the nature of cloud services to existing procurement processes and vendor management disciplines. And to some extent, one other element of maturity, I believe, has to do with, how flexible are we and capable of working with new vendors that may not act as the same as our historic vendors, and whether we can adapt to more lightweight models of contracting, more rapid ways of contracting in recognition of the speed of change in the cloud. You talk about technology marketing. I'll say a little bit more about that. I think, one of the things that we consider as an element of maturity is the ability to, let's say, toot our horn, right? Understand that we're embarking on a grand journey. Here's where we're succeeding. We think that's an important element, as are, let's say, standardized processes and policies that we can extend across different cloud models and different cloud suppliers, and also a mature but flexible governance process for development and operations that recognizes cloud is not really conducive to a classical command and control structure, but a combination of both centralized top-down, but also federated bottom-up kinds of initiatives and governance. All right, now finally, on the technology side, again, an updated network infrastructure topology. Here's another one of the things we've learned, along with the importance of data location, that a lot of network structures aren't really optimized for cloud computing, and we found some surprises along the way. So that's certainly another element of maturity, as is, let's say, adoption and at least appreciation for the benefits of IT automation. Clearly, cloud is a highly automated mode of operation and promises to become only more so over time. And I guess, correlating with that is the importance of DevOps, right? In many ways, cloud and DevOps walk hand in hand. And in fact, the way many organizations are moving to the cloud has to do with, let's say, embrace of agile development and DevOps, use of continuous integration, continuous development principles, and the like. And in fact, this is a direction that is not only encouraged, but in some ways mandated by some of the major hyperscale suppliers. I mentioned microservices architecture and how important that is. Another factor, in addition, I guess, to overall, let's say, understanding of where we are with regard to digital transformation, is just, how well do we understand our applications portfolio? And not only from a business element, right, which ones are adding value to the enterprise and how much, but, others in terms of architectural as well, right? How healthy are they? How much technical debt is imbued in these applications, so that we can inform the decision as to whether to modernize first or migrate first, and in fact, maybe even preceding that decision, seeking to identify which candidates of our applications are really suited and really should even move to the cloud. Again, the recognition, I think, has grown in the industry that whereas at one time we thought public cloud or bust for basically everything, now it's very clear, I think, even for many aggressive cloud implementers, that certain things just shouldn't go there. And finally, maturity in virtualization technologies, that it is present and accounted for. And again, what I showed you, and again, is three parameters of our interactive tool that can help to calculate your cloud maturity. Again, cloud maturity is important to validate and to understand as you move into the cloud, but really the purpose is to identify potential weak points so that you can optimize your current plan and your current strategy to identify any potential areas of weakness or of a lack of capability. Now, just a quick word about there are many challenges that we face in moving to the cloud, including some of the ones I've listed here on this chart. Not to give them short shrift. Obviously, our time is too limited to go into them in great detail today, but be mindful of these specific activities as well as you move forward, and make sure that you accommodate some of these elements as you move forward from, I guess you could say, enabling cloud capability through optimizing it and ultimately governing it in a very effective fashion. But let me just say one thing about a special word of caution. One of the things we have long observed with regard to the cloud is this notion of the so-called uneven handshake. And what we mean by that is the idea that many things about the cloud are taken care of by your supplier. In effect, cloud services are in many ways managed to a certain degree, but still many, let's say, responsibilities remain with you, the buyer and the implementer. And I've listed some of those on the right. Things like overall governance, things like lifecycle management of workloads, things like networks, metadata testing, and of course, elements of security. Sometimes with the emphasis on getting to the cloud, the question of responsibilities for ongoing operations can be left behind. And we think this challenge is compounded by the fact that different cloud models have very different profiles with regards to who is responsible for what. And now, why do I make a point of this? Well, I think it's important to as you, let's say, move toward cloud maturity, right? To be capable of understanding these variations, number one, and be capable of creating, let's say, meaningful divisions of responsibilities that can inform not only your operations plan, but any, let's say, specific sourcing arrangements you may be compelled to make. And in fact, this weakness is one of the major challenges we see facing companies that are seeking to, let's say, establish ongoing operational relationships with service partners. So as you, let's say, formulate your strategy and your so-called RACI model, be ready and able to ask the tough questions, right? Such as, how do we recover our costs? How does, let's say, movement to containers or serverless, alter the operational picture and the division of responsibilities that we have? How do we measure as we move past the virtual machine model in terms of utilization and cost of service? With regard to procurement, right? Is it a reasonable goal to be sort of a front-end procurement engine for all of our users and buyers in the cloud, or should we let them approach the market on their own? And others, such as, what lessons can we take from many efforts we have made in terms of building our own private cloud and apply them to our broader cloud strategy? So finally, in summing up, I think it's important to say, look, think of this as a journey, not a destination. You can look at this as a rough guide as to the kind of things you may care about as you move forward. And again, be ready to assess your maturity. Again, not in the context of go or no go, but rather being mindful of the fact that nobody comes into this, at least no greenfield organization, no brownfield organization, I should say, with a perfect profile for maturing in the cloud. But with the help of our framework, we believe you can identify those elements you need to, let's say, hone in terms of move more assuredly and more rapidly. Now, part of that will regard the right marketing efforts. As I said, it's important, we think, as we move forward, especially given that cloud maturity is a matter of both top-down and bottom-up, to be capable of communicating the status of this journey, as well as trumpeting any successes that you're achieving as a way to build momentum in the enterprise and avoid, any kind of letdown. And part of doing that, to start slow and maybe move your improve your capabilities over time, not only in terms of the people and process and technology dimensions that I've described, but also, let's say, ongoing innovations that you can embrace, such as, let's say, greater not only sourcing of open source type solutions, but let's say engagement with the open source community, which is really one of the real hallmarks of cloud maturity that we have seen. And let's say ultimately developing a mature framework characterized by, an overall approach that is friendly to development, but still setting effective guardrails for the organization in terms of respecting policy and regulatory guidelines so that we can move forward in the cloud journey in the service of digital transformation without any, or at least minimal, bumps along the way. And with that, I'd like to turn it to you, Ali, and to see if we have any questions about what we've described and discussed to this point.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much, Bill, for that amazing insight. As you said, we've come now to the time in our presentation where our good audience gets to ask some questions. So I'd like to ask everyone who's dialed in, please write your questions in the Q&A box that you see in the portal, and then hopefully we'll get Bill to come to them and answer them. If we can't get to a question, we'll follow up with you after the webinar with the answer. So on that, just invite you all again to fire away, add your questions into the portal. I'll give you a little bit of time and then I'll get going.